It's our pleasure to introduce to Alan Lagocki, who will talk about building an operation for your sequencing and scheduling of a railroad.
Welcome. I've subtitled my presentation, The Roadkill Approach to Operations. I don't know if any of you have the Motor Trend Network on your TV, but there's a series of show called Roadkill, where a couple of guys get together and build hot rods, and they don't let perfection get in the way of having fun with their friends. So the way I've developed the sequence schedule, it's sort of a fun way to get realistic operations onto a railroad without having to go through the pressure and the precision of timetable and train order operation, which seems to be the rage right now. It's a little more low-key approach. So my introduction to New Haven, like most people, is standing around trackside, and in my case, I hung around Old Saybrook when I was growing up in the 60s. So there was always a lot of action in the 60s. I'm a proto-freelance modeler. What that means is the Central New England Railroad is still alive in my world, and I'm an O-scale two-rail modeler. What you see here is in Old Saybrook, they had an agent operator. So whenever there was a move to be made at the tower, the agent would close the ticket window and go running across the tracks up into the tower and make the move. And since I was hanging around a lot of the times, he asked me if I wanted to come along tag along with him. So I did. So I'd go upstairs with him, and that's how I became a member of the Sono Switch Tower Museum, because once you get mechanical interlocking in your blood, it's hard to get out of it. The one thing he gave me was, a couple of things, was this is what I call the Rosetta Stone of freight operation in New Haven. It's a symbol freight book, and it had the description of all the symbol freights that ran, where they originated, what they set, where their blocks were, their times, their approximate times, because if you have an employee's timetable, you'll see there are absolutely no freight trains in the timetables. So until I had one of these, I had no idea what I was seeing as everything ripped by. And the other thing that I got there was every through freight that went by had to drop off a form that called out what the train number, the engine numbers, where it was going, who the crew was, and what their consist was en route, in loads, empties, and tonnage. So that was something that was dropped off, and they were just looked like rolled up newspapers along the right of way, and the operator would sometimes pick it up, sometimes leave them, but you pick them up, it's like opening an Easter egg, because inside that rolled up newspaper was one of these forms. So that, again, that was another thing that sort of added to the explanation of what you saw on the tracks going by. So as a modeler, a couple of influences. Frank Ellison, he wrote a book back in the 1940s talking about how he ran and built his model railroad. And he was an O-scaler, outside third rail, but his whole concept was the trains were actors in a play. He had a theatrical background, so he described how he ran his trains first, and then how he built the railroad, which he called the stage for the action to take place on. And the next person I ran into was Waddy House at an NER convention in the late 60s. I sat at the banquet table, and Waddy House was there, and he invited me up to see his railroad, which was the Connecticut Midland Railroad. He lived in West Hartford, and he had regular operating sessions on Thursday evenings. So I got invited up a couple of times to his layout to operate. That was the first time I'd ever participated in an operating session on a model railroad. And he ran his passenger trains first with a fast clock, and then the second half of the night was just the freight trains, and he turned the clock off because his reasoning was that most of the operations of freight trains was more scalable because it took you a certain amount of time to set things out and pick things up, where the passenger schedule. So he didn't want to have his freight operators going crazy trying to get their work done, but he did it with the passengers. And the other thing he introduced me to, his Connecticut Midland Railroad was based on the Central New England Railroad. His railroad ran from Hartford to Maybrook, and that's where I was first introduced to the Central New England, and then I just kept following it ever since. So my railroad is the CNE and the Berkshire line between 1959 and 1961. And I focus on junctions because that's where the towers were. So in prototype operations, it's good to map out where your railroad actually runs. And if you're strictly prototype modeling, you already have the map. You've got your track arrangements and all your connections. But since I'm freelancing, I had to include my C&E started in Hartford and followed the old C&E up to Canaan, and then it hits the Berkshire line, which runs from South Norwalk up to Pittsfield. And there's still a little bit of a branch that goes over to Lakeville. So that's the C&E that my system is based on. But I model the area in and around Danbury. Danbury to the north, Brookfield, and to the south, Bethel. And in my world, the branch to Litchfield still runs from Bethel, but it goes through Hollyville. So this is the stage where the operations take place. This is my railroad. Oh, another thing about Waddy's layout, his layout filled his basement, but he didn't duck under it. It was 11 inches off the floor. So you stepped over the areas to get to the operating pits. This was long before there was walk along with your train and everything like that, but the operators were in operating pits and they ran whatever was around them. So it was 11 inches off the floor. And at one point in time, he said he had catenary, but he kept getting his foot caught in it, so he stopped doing that. But my railroad is not 11 inches off the floor. It's about 48 inches off the floor. So this is a lift-out bridge. Most of the time when the operating it's in. So the duct under here, it's under about 48 inches here. There's a little bit of a lift-out here, and then there's a knot under here because the branch line is a little bit higher, so it's a little easier. But my railroad runs from the north. Brookfield is a staging yard. It comes into Danbury. There's a line that goes over to simulating Maybrook and also Mill Plain. So here's the curve in Danbury, and then it goes through Bethel, and here's where the branch leads off from Bethel, goes through Hollyville, and goes around and up to Litchfield. So that's the stage where the operations take place. So I approached the way setting up a sequence schedule based on envisioning where you would want to be on your railroad standing trackside and map out the operation, what you would see there, and then everything else falls into place on the rest of your railroad. Pick one location and then decide what traffic you're going to see based on the timetable and the symbol freight book, and everything ripples off of that. So Danbury is the main seat on my layout. I like it because it's kind of a small station, but it's got a lot of operation in it. Because there was an active passenger service, there was engine change, there was a diesel or steam and diesel, depending on the era, to electric. There were through freights on the Maybrook line, and there was a junction with another friend of mine. He models a freelance railroad called the Connecticut and Ohio, and his railroad goes through Danbury on its way out to Providence, so I interchanged with him. And that's what that diamond crossing is on my layout. And then what I use to develop my schedule are employee timetables. I don't know if you guys have seen them, but you can usually find, depending on the era. And then the freight symbol book, which is another little bit of Bible. And then obviously articles from the shoreliners and data sheets. So here you go, a little bit larger interpretation. And that's why, oops. Go backwards one. You have to you're not going to find everything exactly what you want. So here's the timetables from 1959, but the freight service book is from 1957, but it's close enough. I'm sorry, I cringe about being close enough, but that's just the way it is. So here's a little larger version of a look at Danbury, and you can see here's the station. It's a little condensed. I can't do it completely, but for the most part, it's maybe 20%, only in the lengths of the L's. For the most part, everything else is pretty well normal. Here's where the freight house is. And in Danbury, actually, all this engine service is inside the loop, but from a practical point of view, I didn't want to have to reach in. It's about 30 inches from here to that, and I really didn't want to have to reach further than that. So I just flipped it to the outside of my main lines. And the engine terminal is here, which is good because all that action's up front, and that's kind of an interesting stuff. There's a track for motor storage. There's a track for cabooses. And here's where the main line comes in. Here's the line that doubles both as the line to South Norwalk and my friends, Connecticut and Ohio. And here's the diamond. This goes up to Brookfield in the north. This goes around to Bethel. And this is the line that loops around and goes to the staging yard, which represents South Norwalk, Maybrook, and Mill Plain. So here are the 2 pages that come out of the timetable, and based on a lot of the traffic was here, I wanted to have I felt I needed at least 2 commuter trains to represent a typical day on the line, And I also wanted the train from Pittsfield down. So these are highlighted on the southbound side and on the northbound side. And so I've got 3 passenger trains. So this is a blank form, and I've got blanks if you guys want to take one and try it on your own afterwards. You can certainly come by and pick it up. It's pretty straightforward. The column down here, here's where you don't get into the precision of to the minute. Everything is just broken in by hours, by hours, and that helps you fit things in a little bit easier, without having to be a slave to the exact time that are in the timetables. The freights, it didn't matter because those are just approximations anywhere, even in the book. So then the next column is the train, the designation of the train, what direction, where it started, where it's going, and any remarks based on how it's going to operate it. So plugging in, the first thing I did was train 353. I put it between 5 and 6 leaving Danbury, headed south. And then the next commuter train was 343, headed to Grand Central. And then a little later on in the morning was 141 that came down from Pittsfield, had the engine changed and continued on. And then on the flip side, coming back, 344, 356, and then 144. So that's sort of the bulk of the passenger operations that happens on a normal day. Now, I also like express traffic and Pullman traffic. And in 1961, I really couldn't justify having Pullman service on the Housatonic Railroad. So what I did was I went down and took a look down to South Norwalk to see if there's anything on the main line that I could maybe run a couple of cars down to make a connection with to go to Washington, D.C. So I went down there and I found that the Federal trains 172 and 173 carried express and sleepers, and it went through South Norwalk early in the morning. So I added trains 472 and 473 to my layout. So here's the pages from the timetable down on the main line. And here's South Norwalk, SS 44 at South Norwalk for the northbound and the southbound versions. So I went back into my schedule and I added those in. They come through really early in the morning, which is kind of nice because in my case, I want to set the sleeper out at the station so that people can board at a normal hour and get out at a normal hour, not at 1 o'clock in the morning. So there's like a slot in the schedule. The sleeper can be parked at the station. It's available for boarding at 8 o'clock at night. And then you could stay on the sleeper till like 9 o'clock in the morning the next morning. So it's just a way of having that simulating with the passenger service. So now the freights. There's a lot of freights that ran through Danbury to Maybrook, and I concentrated on the trains that originated in Cedar Hill because those were pickup freights. There was a lot of hotshot freights that didn't stop in Danbury, but some of the NO and ON freights, they actually set out for the Berkshire branch, so they had operation that I could do. So there's a couple of NO3. It gave you the approximate time it came through, and ON6 coming back the other way. So there was also trains from State Line, to Danbury that originated State Line and in Danbury. So there's those freights, IR1 and RI2 that I added in, and then also the locals that came from Norwalk, South Norwalk, Canaan, and the Mill Plain Shifter. The Mill Plain Shifter is something I created as part of it. So in the back of the symbol freight book, you'll actually see that there'll be a description of all the local freights. There are also some slots that are vacant, and they give you, sort of where they originated and what kind of traffic and work they did. I couldn't follow those exactly because I have a rather small basement and I model on a rather large scale, so I don't have a lot of track space in Danbury where I could have a lot of yard trackage. So the way I set up my locals is they're coming from staging to Danbury, and on the turn, so it comes off the railroad into Danbury and goes back again. Instead of, I can't really originate a lot of traffic on my railroad, but you can still get a lot of activity out of that. So here we go back to our little schedule and we start plugging things in. So here's where NL3 comes in. It comes in sort of in that slot between 473 and 472. It's just a quick drop. They don't do a lot of switching. They come into Danbury. The yardmaster has to be ready to pick up any blocks off of the NL3 and put anything going west. And then here's 0 and 6 coming back at the end of the day. So that's kind of a cleanup version of trains leaving town. And then here's RI2. It comes around the middle of late morning to mid-afternoon. And then the flip side is going back. Again, it comes from staging onto the layout and back again. And then here's the milk plane shifter. That goes behind, and I've got 3 shelves that I switch so I could actually have 12 cars so that the milk plane shifter may make 3 trips across the lift out to get to those industries. And then NX15 comes in and turns from Pittsfield, turns in Danbury and back again. And then NX13 comes from South Norwalk, drops and turns again. And then I've added a milk train. In 1961, it's the ragged edge of milk service, but again, being a proto-freelancer, I can get away with it. So I have a train that comes from Litchfield. It comes down the Litchfield branch. It picks up a milk car in Litchfield. It picks up cans in a little lake station, comes into Hollyville, picks up another milk car in Hollyville, comes into Danbury and goes over to the Marcus Dairy and drops 2 full cars and picks up 2 empties and then turns back again. So this is what my schedule really looks like. You know, this is in ink, and everything else is in pencil because it's a working document. So you just have to sort of work it out on your own and find out what kind of trouble you can get into. And I haven't added the RDC shuttles yet. That'd be something I'd like to do, but I haven't figured out where it's all going to fit. But again, here's where I put in the notes for me to see what's going on. So it's I call it a low-tech version of getting your trains running. It's like get something running. Don't wait till you have everything in place because this will be a living document. You'll just keep learning from it. And that's it. Wow. Any questions?
Second last slide, there's some columns.
Yeah, that's a hand version of this. These are the columns.
What are the last two?
Destination and remarks. So everyone's welcome to come get a plain copy and start doing things on your own.
Thank you, Alan.
Yes, anything else?
Yeah, I've seen other versions of sequence operation where it kind of goes, you wait for X train to terminate before Y train goes out. Do you do that at all, or do you just make sure, when you feel like the railroad's ready to handle another train on it, you send the next one?
Well, when I'm, like most of us, like say 90% of the time you're modeling alone, so I just work through the sequence. But when I have other operators that come, that's when it gets a little hectic. But you'll still only work through, I don't want people freaking out about not meeting things. So we still work through the schedule. We may not make it through the whole day. Yes?
What do you use car cards?
I do. But that's a whole nother presentation. Yes.
Yeah, my layout and operation, yeah, something I'm thinking too. Excuse me. I'm planning to concentrate on passenger train operating. And what I'm thinking is also moving the historical sequence, starting off with, trains by I2s and I4s, gradually putting in the I5s, the PA, PAs, eventually FLS, kind of site, also going from, the 100 green equipment, to begin us as well. So someone that sequence will.
Sure. And the one thing about prototype modeling, even though I'm proto-freelancer, when you set an era, you really are able to sort of create your shopping list so you aren't buying everything that comes out. It helps you focus on what's really important to what you're trying to convey. I don't know. Did I run out of time? Did I talk too fast? I did talk too fast. Sorry.